Hi everyone, welcome to section 2, where we are going to be creating a web service for the Angular UI. Now there's going to be a lot of work done in this section, and we're going to be starting off with some refactoring. Now I use that term loosely, but it's going to involve doing some cleanup, getting rid of files and some code that's related to the template app, the weather app that is, and then we're going to be refactoring some code. Following that, we'll do some test logging just so that you can know how to do that whenever you need to debug. And then I'll show you how to set up some placeholders when data is loading. Before I get started, there's a couple of things I wanted to show you that I've added onto the project. One is that I added this Chrome extension called JSON Viewer, and that basically allows us to look at our JSON in a nice, neat format like this. The other thing that I did is in our project, I added it to source control. So if I make any modification, like if I add a space here, you'll see on the left-hand side that the number 1 is indicated on the source control icon. And at the bottom here, you see the letter M indicating that this file was modified. You don't need to do that. I just wanted to point it out in case you're wondering what are those indications on the left-hand pane over there. The next thing that I'd like to do is upgrade our version of Bootstrap. Currently right now, we are using 3.3.7, as you can see here in this package.json. And what we want to do is navigate to our client folder and upgrade to 4.1.3. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead and do some cleanup. That is, remove code that we're not going to be using that was installed by default that's associated with the weather application. Now that Bootstrap's installed, the first file that I'd like to go to start doing some cleanup is app.component. And from now on, when I'm jumping to different files, I'm just going to go ahead and hit Control P and begin typing in part of the file name to easily jump to it. Like I see here, app.components, we want the HTML though. So I'm going to click that. And we're not going to use the navigation bar that came with the weather app. So I'm going to delete this reference here. Next, I'm going to go to the app.module.ts file. And I'm going to remove, starting from the bottom, this router module that's associated with the weather app. We're going to delete that. Make sure you remove that comma on line 26, or at least for me, it's line 26. And right above, we can remove also fetch data component, counter, home, and nav menu component. And lastly, we can remove the imports associated with those components. Fetch, counter, home, and nav, in addition to router module. And now we can't forget about our folders. We're going to go ahead and highlight by holding the Control key down and selecting Nav menu, Home, Fetch Data, and Counter. Right-click and banish them. Okay, so now we're ready to do some refactoring of some code. Specifically, we have our controller here called Sample Data Controllers. We want to give that a better name that's associated with our application. So why don't we call this Movie Controller? And I'll copy that, hit enter, and within the Movie Controller file, we want to remove the reference to sample data also. And there's just 2 of them. So I'm just going to paste in Movie Controller here and Movie Controller here. Now, while we're in this controller, another thing that we're going to be doing for our conventions, we're going to be passing in an ID in our get method. So instead of using action here, what I'm going to do is remove that and place in, within curly braces, ID. And along with that, we can modify this to find and pass in the ID. And it's complaining right now. That's because we actually need to put in the parameter here, and it will be a type of a long ID. Now, in addition to this change, we want to update our router to use our URI that points to API slash, and it's going to be movies. Okay, so we can try to do a quick test to make sure that that code works. But before we do that, let me go ahead and remove these commented lines here just to keep everything nice and tidy. And now I will go to the terminal, back up one directory, and run our application. And what we're going to do is pass in the URL using API slash movies and put in an ID of a movie just to make sure that our JSON that we return reflects that record. And there we go. I put in localhost 5001 /API /movie/2, and it returned movie ID 2. And that looks good. Next, why don't we go ahead and move on to logging. I want to show you, if you needed to log, exactly what you can do. And it's pretty straightforward. What we can do is jump, let's say, to our repository. I basically want to have a method where I can write out to the console. So in our case, why don't we say, I'm going to change this variable here of movie to movie data. And I'll update this here also. And I'm going to add in a method for logging right under our constructor. And it's going to be called getMovie. And this is where we're going to write out some content, movie data requested, and then return this movie object. And what I want it to do is call our movie method. And we're also going to want to modify our URL over here in our constructor to say movies. No longer says sample data. And for our HTTP client, let's make this private over here. So now if I were to bring up a browser and I hit F12, you'll see at the bottom here it has movie data requested. So this is just a quick, easy way to log information to help you in the debugging process. But now what we should do is to bring up a record. And so what we're going to want to do is I'm going to add in a constant for movies URL, and I'm going to use that in this method here. What I'm going to do is comment out this log line, get rid of the return, and instead use subscribe. And right here, the word movie, the property movie, is not being recognized. Well, that's because we had modified it to be movie data. So why don't we change this back to movie? Same thing over here on line 13. And on line 17, we're going to pass in an ID. I'll use ID 3. So we're using our URI to pass in an ID for a movie. And once we get our data, that should display our content. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in our web page. I'm hitting refresh this time. Sometimes you just need to hit refresh. Usually Webpack works fairly well in updating the content, but if you see that for some reason it doesn't and there's no other error, just hit refresh and it should work. And it does. We have Team America, that's record 3, and our content is displayed as we expect. The next thing I want to show you is just how to quickly add a placeholder. Sometimes when the content comes up, it might take a while, so we don't want just a blank space to be there. We want something to say it's pulling data. So I'm going to modify this so that a placeholder is indicated, loading data. And now, when I refresh the data, you'll see it'll say loading data for a quick second before our data comes up. You saw that? That was pretty quick. If you want to actually see it in a more straightforward fashion, we can come to our controller and within here have the system wait for 5 seconds. And now when I bring up the website, you can see it says loading data. It's waiting for 5 seconds. and then our content will be displayed.